So our class is now being recorded. Good morning, everyone. Today is September 11th, 2025. We have just, before recording our class, participated in a minute's memorial for the victims of 9/11 and dedicate our study to their memories. We are studying Maimonides, Hilkhot Teshuva from Mishneh Torah. That's a Hebrew way of saying the laws of repentance in Maimonides' great code of Jewish law, Mishneh Torah, which is kind of a digest compendium of all matters pertaining to how to live a Jewish life according to halakha. So it's a halachic work, and we have been now studying for 2 seasons. We began our Hilkhot Teshuva study at this time in Elul last year. Now it is Elul 5785, the last of the months of the way we count years. So just a couple of weeks until Rosh Hashanah, 11 days to be specific. And we're off to the races. I hope everybody is well and healthy. By the way, on the subject of 9/11, as is the custom at Westchester Reform Temple, we will memorialize 9/11 at Shabbat services tomorrow evening at 6:15. We also live stream all of our services on wrtemple.org and on the Temple's YouTube channel. If you're watching my YouTube channel for this class, you won't find it here, but the Temple's YouTube channel, the Westchester Reformed Temple, and associated social media, Facebook, and what have you. I will not be participating in tomorrow evening's service because of a family obligation, but my wonderful clergy colleagues will lead a Shabbat service where we acknowledge the Elul season and also the memorial of 9/11. As it turns out, by the way, we've done a little bit of calendar exploration. 9/11 next year, which will be the 25th yard site of the attacks, actually falls on Erev Rosh Hashanah. So it is a Friday, September 11th, 2026. And that will, of course, inflect how we observe the coming of that new year. But we have a more proximate new year to welcome in just 11 days. So here we are. So last week we spent our entire time on section 9 of chapter 2 of Hilkhot Teshuva. And today we're going to go directly into the 10th and last of the teachings in Mishneh Torah from this chapter before we proceed without interruption to chapter 3. So I'm going to just call up on screen where we are. Let us say a bracha together. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We lift up gratitude to the Holy One who invites us to immerse ourselves in these words of Jewish learning. And here we go. So this is Mishneh Torah, chapter 2, section 10. Asur, that is a word that means it is forbidden. We joke, by the way, with Cantor Isaac Sonnet Asur, who was born Isaac Asur, that his name actually means prohibited, verboten, Asur. So Asur la'adam, for a person. Oh, sorry. Every time I do the little clicky thing, it switches our view. Asur la'adam, it is forbidden for a person, lihiot achzari. This is a great word, a word that I hope you will store in your Jewish glossary. Achzari, not a common word, but it means cruel. And it's a sharp word. It's a word that, it's not one of those Hebrew words with multiple layers of meaning. It means cruelty. So it is forbidden for a person to be cruel, velo yitpayes, and not to be appeased. So just by way of recollecting where we were a week ago, we were talking about forgiveness and repentance, and both the obligations incumbent on the one who has trespassed another, as well as the transgressee or the trespassee, the one who is injured or hurt. And so now we're really framing this around the obligation of the one who has been offended and who is now being approached in a spirit of teshuvah, of repentance, in order that forgiveness might be given and obtained by the original transgressing party. But Maimonides makes it clear that for one to withhold forgiveness, to refuse to be appeased, yit payes, and if it sounds like appease, payes, that's right. that is, in fact, a demonstration of cruelty. It is not nice. It is mean to withhold forgiveness. Ela, rather, Yehe Noach. That person should be Noach, like Noah. Actually, it's the same word as the name of the great biblical figure, and probably about 45 boys in our religious school right now are named Noah, very popular name, perennially, but it means comfort. And in fact, in like the revolutionary period of America, there were lots of people named Comfort. It was a kind of a man's name. Noach comes from the Hebrew infinitive verb lanuach, which means to rest or to take shelter in the sense of to be comforted. Let's go back to our text display. But rather, Yehe Noach, he should be, I guess, Noach here means kind of easy, soft, not hard and ungiving or unforgiving, but rather gentle. That's how Noach is being used here. He should be Noach, lirtzot. So it's combined with another verb. You should be um, easy and gentle to satisfy or to appease. So you, if you are offended by another and that person earnestly approaches you in the spirit of Teshuvah and does all the things that one is supposed to do according to Maimonides in order to obtain forgiveness, one should not be hard and difficult to appease, but rather easy. I think that's probably the best word for Noach here, easy to appease, easy to propitiate. V'kashe lichos, and the opposite of that would be hard, difficult. V'kashe means difficult or hard. Lichos, to anger. So be easy to propitiate, difficult to make angry, Uvisha'a shemivakesh mimenu, and at the time that he is being beseeched, right? At the time that one is beseeching of him or pleading with him, hachote, the one who has transgressed, limchol, to to forgive that person, mochel belev shalem, he should forgive with a full heart. Mashalem, of course, like shalom, complete, whole. He should forgive with a whole heart, uvenefesh chafetza, and with a willing spirit. All right, so put the whole thing together. I'll read it one more time, but this time with my translation in English. It is forbidden for a person to be cruel and not appeasable, but rather one should be easy to propitiate, easy to appease, hard to anger. And at the time that one approaches that person, the one who has transgressed approaches him for forgiveness, one should forgive with a whole heart and a willing spirit. Let's see what they did with their translation. It's forbidden for a person to be cruel and refuse to be appeased. Rather, he should be easily pacified. That's a nice word, but hard to anger. When the person who wronged him asks for forgiveness, he should forgive him with a complete heart and a willing spirit. Okay, so my translation is pretty close to the way it's translated by our friend Eliyahu Tuje or Tuger of Moznaim Publishing. As you can see, that's our translation up here. All right, let's read a little bit more. Ve'afilu heitzerlo. Okay, so these words here, even if he pissed him off, even if he aggravated him, v'chatalo harbe, and really sinned against him. Harbe is just an intensifier word in Hebrew. So in this case, it's an adverb to describe the way in which one transgressed against this person. A lot. Transgressed a lot, either in number of times or more likely, so frequency of sin, but more likely severity, right? So harbe could apply to both the the count, how many times this person has done wrong, as well as the intensity or severity of the wrongdoing. So even if one has done pretty serious emotional and psychic harm to another, and really angered him, really aggravated him, ve'afilu heitzerlo, really pissed him off. Nevertheless, lo yikom velo yitor. He should not be resentful or vengeful. He should not bear a grudge or exact retribution. So this, again, as we spent quite some time last week talking about the difference between what this is on paper and what it feels like, how difficult it can be in practice. We're going to keep going all the way through this first text before I invite comments or questions. I assume so far this is all pretty straightforward text, and therefore understandable. But stop me if that is not the case for you. V'zehu darkam shel zera Yisrael v'libam hanachon. Okay, so this is a really interesting kind of conclusion that Maimonides reaches. This is the way, zehu darkam, from the word derech, with a suffix of plural possession here. V'zehu darkam shel zera Yisrael. Kind of I would say, uh, ornate Hebrew. This is the way of the seed of Israel, the stock of Israel. So this is the Jewish way. That's a poetic way of saying this is how Jews behave. V'libam hanachon, which means, and that is the correct heart or the correct way to think about it, right? So he's saying it is Jewish, which is really interesting to hear Maimonides, who ordinarily also appeals to reason. And, the reason we do things is because it's a mitzvah. Here he's simply saying this is the Jewish way. This is a calling card of how Jewish people give and receive forgiveness. It's also the right thing to do. How did they translate it down below? They say, this is the path of the seed of Israel and their upright spirit. Okay, so this is an interesting libam hanachon. Literally means a right heart, a heart that is right or a heart that is proper. Nachon is a word that means correct. It also means prepared. It's also very, very casual colloquial Hebrew. Somebody says, here's how you get to the grocery store. Go straight down the street at your first right, make a right, and it's on your right. Got it? And you say, Nachon, correct, I got it. Okay. Aval, however, ha'ovdei kochavim, okay, people who worship the stars, that is a euphemism for Gentiles. But they are often called Ovdei Kochavim, literally star worshippers or idolaters, right? But it is a catch-all phrase to refer to Gentiles. It is not intended to be disparaging, but it usually is somewhat disparaging, especially when it is used the way Maimonides uses it here, which is rather conventional both for him and for Jewish literature, sacred literature writ large, which is to compare and contrast, right? Well, we Jews are one way, but the idol worshippers, that is to say, all others, Gentiles, are another way. And he even goes on to throw in an additional epithet for the non-Jew, the Gentile. In addition to Ovdei Kochavim, those who worship the stars, the idol worshippers, are lev, those of uncircumcised hearts. Arel, this word here, arel, means a foreskin. So literally those with foreskinned hearts. But because we don't refer to an uncircumcised person as foreskinned, we say uncircumcised. So a person with an uncircumcised spirit or an uncircumcised heart, we can talk about what he's referring to, we can talk about what he means, but it's clearly in contrast to the Jew. A person who is an idolater or a Gentile with an uncircumcised heart, a non-ken. They're not like that. They don't behave the same way. Ela, but rather, okay, Shmara Netzach. Okay, so this is and there are a couple of these parenthetical words which I wasn't sure what to do with when I gave this a cursory first read. We'll come back to it, see what the translator gives us. But rather, the Gentiles are Shmara Netzach, which is a euphemism that basically means they keep grudges. They keep grudges forever. Whereas Jews, by nature or by nurture, by character and disposition and training and learning and cultural way, do not keep grudges. Now, I don't know about you, and it is true that I travel mostly in the circles of the Jewish people. I've met plenty of Jews who keep grudges. I am both convinced that it's not fair to make this comparison and also highly inaccurate, right? I don't think there's any, I think that it is human nature to be retributive, to retaliatory, not to give forgiveness easily, when one is aggrieved, to stew in one's own grievance and sense of victimization, and to really long-term cultivate a mindset that, they, the other party, is the exclusive bearer of guilt and wrongdoing, and that I, as the offended party, have no responsibility. Maimonides, I think, wants to underscore through this, in some ways, I think, both clunky and somewhat ugly and unnecessary contrast between the Jew and the Gentile, nevertheless wants to underscore that the Jewish way, perhaps contrary to human nature, is to offer forgiveness completely and freely and not to be difficult to be appeased. Nevertheless, I'm just registering my own discomfort with the way in which he comes to that point, to make that point by leveraging a comparison with the non-Jew, right? In order to suggest that it is Jewish to behave in a certain commendable way, he references all the other people, all the non-Jews who don't behave the way they should. Judy, you have a hand raised and a microphone muted, so kindly unmute yourself and I'll lower your hand digitally.
The what did we learn last week? Wasn't about a person who kept who would refuse to grant forgiveness,
Indeed.
and the
Yeah.
Rav was behind that. Then they, if they asked 100 times, 1,000 times, they would be.
Yeah.
Isn't
Right? If
that
his colleague does not desire to forgive him, so you have to keep appeasing until he forgives him, two and even three times. If the one who is being entreated for forgiveness does not wish to forgive, then the original offending party, the transgressor, should marshal together a group of three friends and approach the one who has been offended, approach them requesting forgiveness. If the wrong party is still not appeased, repeat the process a second and third time. So there's this very elaborate, very almost perseverative process of seeking and winning, or achieving forgiveness from the party whom you have originally offended. So yeah, this is
is
consonant with what
contradiction,
has
isn't
just
it?
been said.
So were they not good Jews?
Well, what's interesting is that, I think who's the we in that sentence, Judy?
The people, the person who refuses to grant, to allow those who are asking for forgiveness to forgive.
Yeah,
They
I think Maimonides is suggesting that you're not being a good Jew if you perseverate in your own sense of grievance. That in order for the world to move forward, in order for all social interactions to be not only lubricated but maintained successfully, we have to get to a place where forgiveness is regularly and freely given, and of course, we'd love to live in a world where no one ever committed a transgression against another. But that's not the world we live in. And so, because that is part of our nature, we need a mechanism by which offense does not rupture relationships permanently. Otherwise, we really will be living in a society where it's every person for him and herself. By the way, if you look around the world, especially on this day where we're, reeling from the attacks of 9/11 afresh and reeling from political violence afresh and mass shootings in schools afresh, it is reasonable for us to feel very, very worried that we're living in exactly the kind of society that Maimonides is cautioning against, a society in which every grievance is settled with violence instead of with appeasement, right? Every grievance leads not to debate or dialogue, but to bang your dead. I don't wish to politicize our sacred study, but it's hard not to draw the comparison. It's staring us right in the face. So, yes, Judy, I think he is saying, no, you're not a good Jew. Obviously, you're not doing the Jewish thing if you commit an offense, but Maimonides seems to be expending a lot more energy talking to the person who has been offended and saying, you also have a responsibility in Teshuvah. Teshuvah is not a one-person process unless the only offended party is, as it were, God. If the only offense has been committed against God, well, then the Day of Atonement itself atones. and the process of Teshuvah it makes atonement for you. You know, oh, I'm sorry. I ate a cheeseburger. At the time, it seemed like a fun thing to do, but boy, do I regret it, right? A transgression of a ritual nature, or even of an ethical nature that did not cause harm. We had a great, robust discussion with our guest scholar in residence, Rabbi Roli Matalon, this past weekend, where he brought us a really fun and salacious text about a rabbi who just couldn't control his sexual urges and would pay any sum of money to seek out any number of prostitutes. Like this, he was a sex addict, and
Because you
this.
didn't wash the pot yesterday when you fried it.
Oh, thanks, Joe. Sorry, that was an
I'm sorry.
interesting rejoinder to my comment. So uh, the point that Rowley was making, that Rabbi Matalon was making, was that, look, there has to be a way back for the transgressor. But what Maimonides really wants to focus on is, the transgressee. And we had this interesting conversation last week about, well, is seeking out the services of a prostitute, as it were, a victimless crime? And there were different opinions in the room. There were some who suggested, what harm are you doing? You're actually supporting somebody's livelihood, or as is something I hear on the left of the political or social spectrum these days, sex work is work. There is a movement, particularly in the American left, to not just legalize sex work, but also to dignify sex work. I would say that in the eyes of the ancient rabbis, there's no path to sex work being considered a dignified profession. Um, and therefore, participating in the economy of sex work is itself problematic for the rabbis, and it's not a victimless crime because where there is an economy to support a particular way of work, more women will likely to be illegally and immorally trafficked and abused, right? So if you participate in that economy, the prostitute that you're actually with at any given moment may not be a direct recipient of harm or abuse if the act is consensual. But some could argue that building up the economy in which people actually make their livelihood through sex work feeds a lot of bad actors. Right. I'm not convinced that prostitution is always a victimless crime. It does give aid and comfort to people who profit off of trafficking their victims. Okay. Alan and then Audrey, please unmute yourself before speaking.
Yeah, you mentioned the frequency of forgiveness, whether it's what did you say,
Yeah, the word harbe could mean
nurture
frequency
or
or
nature.
severity. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you said nurture and nature, and it brings to mind a very descriptive Yiddish word. Many people in the audience would know it. It's called broigus. So for having a word like broigus means that the frequency is not so high in forgiveness in the Jewish circle. Broigus means, if I could paraphrase, you're so mad at someone that it's over the top. They don't even exist to you.
Right. I sit Shiva for you. You're dead to me. Yep. And
So
that too, by the way, even the fact that that stereotype, sometimes played for comic effect, exists within Jewish circles, I think, disproves Maimonides' claim that, Jewish people don't do this. I'm like, no, I think, and honestly, if I want to give Maimonides the benefit of the doubt, which I do, I think he knows that. I think he's using it in a more colloquial way to say certain behaviors just aren't Jewish. It's not about like, I'm not going to unpack it at the halachic level. I'm going to appeal to your sensibility as a Yid, right? As a fellow Yid, it's not Jewish to be cruel by withholding forgiveness. The Jewish way is actually to give forgiveness freely. So but by the way, harder in practice than on paper, isn't it? Right. Of course. Audrey, your turn.
All right. You've spent a lot of both classes talking about the person who won't accept an apology or a request for forgiveness. What do you do with somebody who doesn't ask for forgiveness?
Well, yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is, it is still the case that the first step in Teshuvah begins with the transgressor. Without that, there can be no forgiveness. It's the sine qua non, right? You must have the transgressor willing to look within and say, that wasn't my best. I missed the mark. And not only that, in the case where the harm has been done to another person, I've got work to do with this other person and for our relationship. So, without a doubt, none of the responsibilities incumbent on the one who has been hurt, which is the focus of last week's and today's study, exonerates or alleviates the original transgressor from the primary responsibility to be the one who approaches first. It's got
Because
to
that,
start with that.
right, because of course that would lead one to hold a grudge permanent.
Exactly. I mean, look, there are times when I think we've all had these experiences. I've lost count in my life where I actually have hurt another person, where I have given offense and didn't even know it, or
Right,
couldn't figure out what exactly I did, but all I know is something has changed.
right.
Like, to use the word the kids use, they're ghosting me, like they're not returning my calls, or I get a very perfunctory text message back to an effusive message. This happens all the time. I really do send these birthday and anniversary and goodwill messages from my actual cell phone. There's a real person doing this behind it. I write them myself. And I have some assistance in the database front end of things, but it's me. And sometimes if somebody just doesn't respond to repeated outreach, I start to worry. I'm like, do they think that it's a computer? Or did I do something to cause offense? And so I might just say, hey, want to check in. How are you? Everything okay? And then if they continue not to say anything, then I'm worried. Then I'm like, "Eh, talk to me. Like, don't disappear. I know that it takes a little bit of bravery to talk to anyone about hurt feelings. Many people would rather just clam up, ignore it, not make waves. I don't need to bother the rabbi with this. Or I'm so angry at the rabbi that I can't bring myself to tell him, or that person should know better, or it shouldn't be on me to point out the way in which you hurt me. I get all of that because I've been on the other side of it too. But the Jewish thing is that both have to make some motion toward the other. And that is both the beauty and the difficulty of true teshuvah. Russell, I saw a hand for a moment and then I didn't.
Uh, Thank you. Uh, Further to what you're saying, and also to the very thoughtful question that was raised, uh, is the contradiction between last week's narrative and this one inviting us to consider that there are actually many valences of forgiveness? Ask ourselves exactly what is forgiveness?
Right.
Uh, just as you say, it's sort of human to bear a grudge. Uh, it's also human to have, I think, many levels of forgiveness. There's the, okay, well, look, I'm not rejecting you from my community, but I'm not sure I would necessarily invite you to do business with me again, or something like that, or at least not right away. Is it suggesting that there actually is a very large spectrum? Saying no is not a Jewish thing, but looking for some way to begin a process, to begin a journey so that the needle moves from more rudimentary forms of forgiveness. I wonder if that is what we are invited to consider.
I think absolutely, and I think that the coming 7 chapters will invite us to go deeper and deeper and deeper into the nuances. It is Maimonides who often organizes Jewish ethical behavior in kind of hierarchical structures. So it's Maimonides. The classic example, of course, is in charitable giving, in tzedakah. Maimonides says, well, actually, there are many layers to this. Tzedakah that is just throw a few coins at somebody who's begging with a begrudging expression without actually humanizing the person you are helping. It's better than not giving anything, but it's a pretty low form of tzedakah, and that there are higher and higher and higher rungs. Similarly, I agree with you, and it will be interesting to see as the text unfolds, but I have to disclose I haven't read past chapter 3 at this point, how Maimonides acknowledges the very human valences of forgiveness which do vary. And I do think that there are higher and lower forms. And also just based on again, the frequency and or the severity of the transgression and the dispositions of both the transgressor and the one who has been hurt, there are different levels of forgiveness as well, just as there are different levels of harm and transgression and sin. So too, one might be able to say, look, I forgive you of this offense against me or against my loved ones or against whatever. I forgive you, but that doesn't mean we're going to go back to being business partners or friends even, right? Forgiveness, as I think is wisely noted, is not so much about liberating the one who has transgressed. It's actually also, and perhaps even principally, about liberating the one who has been hurt from having to carry the hurt around. So, and that's, of course, a subjective evaluation. What if I'm the hurt party, if I'm the transgressee, to use Alan's word from last week, what do I need to do to let this go so that it doesn't come to dominate my life and my psyche? Like that, I think, is really important, and I fully expect that Maimonides is going to be with you and with us every step of the way on that. Thank you, Aaron.
And if I
Yeah,
may, I just
please.
sort of
Yeah,
had
follow up.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just had a follow-up question. I'm also wondering whether the primary purpose for this instruction is is this a community? Is this building the Jewish people as a community? Is this to win God's approval, or is it to win our own approval?
Yes. And actually he's going to make that pretty clear that it is in chapter 3. That's what chapter 3 is all about. So we'll get through, I forgot there's 10 and 11 in chapter 2, and we should have time to do one teaching from the beginning of chapter 3 as well today. So hold that thought. Aaron.
It's okay, we'll leave it there.
Okay, then we'll proceed. So back to our text now. So even if he aggravated or wronged him severely, he should not seek revenge or bear a grudge. This is the path of the Israelites, the Jewish people, and their upright spirit. In contrast, the insensitive Gentiles don't love that idiomatic translation, though it is probably what Maimonides meant. Remember, the exact words are those who worship the stars, so the idolaters, as well as those who have uncircumcised hearts. Playing, by the way, off of an absolutely stunning turn of phrase from Deuteronomy chapter 20 from the Parsha just 2 weeks ago, or was it last week? No, 2 weeks ago, Parshat Shoftim, which says, therefore, cut away the thickening around your heart. But literally it says, cut out the foreskin. So circumcise your hearts. We know what circumcision is. We know what a foreskin is from the standpoint of anatomy. But the Torah actually takes the idea of circumcision, which is to bind a person covenantally unto God by marking his flesh in his genitals, and instead turns it into a metaphor of not being callous, right? Take away that protective outer layer that we use to insulate ourselves from being hurt. Well, the same layers of emotional numbness or invulnerability, the airs of invulnerability that we cultivate and put on as we make our way through a very painful and messy world, these are coping strategies, also prevent us from giving forgiveness when it is warranted, right? So part of forgiveness, both giving and earning, requires emotional vulnerability and the willingness to stand, as it were, emotionally uncircumcised before the other. Very hard stuff, though. I think it's the work of a lifetime, quite literally and figuratively, of course, as well. Anne, unmute yourself before you speak, please.
Yes, I thank you for that last comment, because I was thinking just before you said that, as a therapist, it's what brings people to see a therapist. What struggle, and they could be on either side. They could either be the one offending or the one having been offended.
Yeah.
And It can dominate a life, and unless some resolution is made, either in the way we're talking about it today or in some other way, that it can really ruin and really be a heavy burden on a life. So thank you. This is
Thank you.
very,
It
very,
means a lot to have a therapist corroborate from your distinctive perspective what I'm trying to teach and what Maimonides wants to get across. I mean,
I'm always struck by how Judaism seems to approach the important questions.
yeah, I find that Judaism is often, almost, not always, but often psychologically astute. Much of
Yes.
what Maimonides was getting at about human nature and what is hard and what is still necessary uh, is proved again and again and again in other disciplines, including, psychotherapy. Okay, so now we're going to complete this paragraph in the file, and it's a little bit weird. It's going to require that we do a little bit of a textual uh, side side road parallel path here. I'll show you what I mean. Okay. So I'm going to keep it in English because it'll just be a little bit simpler to work through it. Similarly, so the Gentiles don't act this way. Rather, their wrath is preserved forever. They bear grudges. Okay, now what's his proof text for this? Because every now and then, even in Mishneh Torah, which postures as the only book of Jewish writing you'll ever need, nevertheless, Maimonides still appeals to scripture as he deems necessary to prove a point. Similarly, because the Gibeonites did not forgive and refused to be appeased. So he's saying, look, we have a biblical example of a whole people who acted in this way that I'm describing in association with Gentiles, in contrast to the Jewish way, the way that is both descriptive of the Jewish character, but perhaps even more aspirationally what Jews should do. The Gibeonites did not forgive and they refused to be appeased, as it says in in 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 2. They are described there as follows: the Gibeonites are not among the children of Israel. So what's Maimonides doing here? In order to unpack it, take a look at the text. So, and by the way, the beauty of Sepharia. Click on the reference and there it is. Okay, so this is chapter 21 rather, of the book of 2 Samuel. Like a handful of books in the Hebrew Bible, the books are actually such long form narratives that for the purpose of ancient scroll making techniques, it was a long time before you could put a very, very, very big piece of parchment on a single roller, or let alone on two rollers. A two-roller Torah scroll is actually a post-biblical invention, probably first century of the Common Era. So many hundreds of years after the text itself is completed. So many times books that are continuous or contiguous narratives would be split in half just so you wouldn't have this huge unwieldy, mass of parchment that you'd have to schlep around in an earthenware vase everywhere, right? Like that's both impossible and heavy and whatnot. So instead of putting it on two rollers, it used to just be, well, here's First Samuel, here's Second Samuel, but it's not actually two literatures. It's one long book. So Second Samuel chapter 21, here's the context. The first verse tells us, there was a famine during the reign of King David, year after year for 3 years. David inquired of God, and God replied, it is because of the blood guilt of Saul and his house, for he put some Gibeonites to death. All right, what's going on here? Well, there's a famine. It's bad for the Jewish people. Israel is, of course, totally dependent on rainfall. The economy of ancient Israel, unlike the economy of the great empires in Mesopotamia and Egypt, which were dependent on the flooding of the banks of rivers, like the Tigris and Euphrates in Mesopotamia or the Nile in Egypt, the agrarian economy of ancient Israel was entirely rainfall dependent. It's why the people were more nomadic and agricultural, dependent on rainfall. Oops, sorry, I bumped my computer, jostled me. Because of that, one of the motifs of the biblical narratives will be how famine affected the Israelite community. So there's a famine going on in Israel, and generally what you see is kings will petition God and say, help us, save us, deliver us, bring the rains back. And what's going on here, and as was the case with pretty much most biblical theology, certain books like Job contradict this, but the basic operating premise here is that if we are suffering as a collective, our nation must have done something to incur God's disfavor. In other words, I don't know what we did wrong, but God is upset, or someone did something bad, and therefore God is punishing us, right? So the experience of collective suffering was often interpreted as dispositive of God's disfavor because of human transgression. I'll say it again. The experience of human suffering at the collective level was usually interpreted as a sign of God's disfavor because of some wrongdoing on the part of the people. In this case, the explanation comes back, well, actually, it's not you, David. It's what your predecessor Saul did. Look again, what did Saul do? Well, we'll find out. He put some Gibeonites to death, presumably against the wishes of the divine. I'm not immediately conversant in the reference here. I didn't go down this rabbit hole all the way. I only went down a little bit. Read the next verse. So what's going on here in further explanation? The king summoned the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now, the king meaning David, right? So Saul is out of the picture. Saul had perpetrated a wrong against the Gibeonite people. David wants to appease them. Now you understand how this is going to connect, right? So this is going to be about transgression and forgiveness. That's what Maimonides wants us to see. So the king goes to the Gibeonites and he spoke to them. And here's the thing that Maimonides observes, that the text makes a special effort to highlight the following comment. Now, the Gibeonites were not of Israelite stock, but a remnant of the Amorites. The Amorites were the the old Babylonian Empire, like pre-Nebuchadnezzar, sorry. The Gibeonites were not of Israelite stock, but rather a remnant of the Amorites to whom the Israelites had given an oath. In other words, we had a treaty with these people. They are not Jews. They are not Israelites, but we had a treaty with them, which is why Saul's killing some of them was a bad move. And Saul had tried to wipe them out in his zeal for the people of Israel and Judah. That's the offense. David asked the Gibeonites, what shall I do for you? How shall I make expiation so that you may bless God's own people? In other words, I don't want us to be in this bad spot anymore. My predecessor, King Saul, did a bad thing. He attacked you when we had a treaty. He shouldn't have gone against you. I'm sorry. What can I do to appease you? You probably can already anticipate how the Gibeonites respond. They answered him, we have no claim for silver or gold against Saul and his household, and we have no claim on the life of anyone else in Israel. It's like, we don't want anything from you. And David responded, whatever you say, I'll do for you. What can I do to make this better? And they go on and they say to the king, the man who massacred us and planned to exterminate us so that we should not survive in all the territory of Israel, let 7 of Saul's sons be handed over to us, and we will impale them before God in Gibeah of Saul, the chosen of God. And the king said, okay, if that's the price of doing business, I'll do it. We may say, oh my God, King David agreed to those terms, that he just handed over 7 of Saul's own issue. Well, yeah, but that's not the point that Maimonides wants us to extract. What Maimonides is pointing out is, look at how un-Jewish it is of these Gibeonites not to be more forthcoming in their forgiveness. That they caused so much suffering, 3 years of famine, because of their recalcitrance. Well, they could have been more forgiving, but instead they exact these extremely demanding terms. All right, we don't need to go too far down the rabbit hole. It's just interesting that Maimonides has this story. And by the way, it does speak to the fact that we're not only talking about individual transgression and forgiveness, we're also talking about the national level, the collective level. And that will come up again, as I've noted, in chapter 3. Okay, so now on to the next text. All right, so this is 11. Ha-chote lachavero, the one who transgresses against his friend, umet, who has died. So in other words, the situation that's being set up here is a person has transgressed against a friend, and then the friend dies, kodem sheyivakesh mechila, before he could ask for forgiveness, before the one who transgressed could seek forgiveness from the one he offended. So you do something bad to another person, you hurt that person, and then they have the audacity to go and die, leaving you spiritually intestate, right? Like there's no, what are we going to do now? Because I'm carrying the guilt of my sin, and this person had the nerve to go and die on me before I could say I'm sorry. Well, that's what's happening. And by the way, ain't that like real life? Exactly. Let's see what happens. Mevi asara b'nei adam, that person, the transgressor, should gather 10 people, uma midan, and place them, stand them up, al kivro, station them around his grave. I mean, literally, it says have them stand on his grave, but not in a disrespectful way. Have him go to the dead guy's grave, v'yomar bifnehem, and speak in their presence. So picture it, the guy who's done wrong wants to seek forgiveness from a friend who has died. So how do you seek forgiveness from your dead? This is a very big question as Yom Kippur approaches, right? We all want forgiveness, but one of the things we rarely talk about is, well, what do we do about all of the ways in which we hurt our loved ones or were hurt by them, and now somebody had the audacity to go off and die, and I'm just left holding it. What forgiveness will there ever be for me? You don't have to raise your hands, but if you feel affected personally by this, please know that I see you, because I think that this is every person I know. There's someone in our lives that we wish there were the thing I could have said to that person, but I didn't do it in time. And now they're gone. And now I can never say it. I see this all the time. I mean, what happens to the person who in the prime of life is struck down by an accident or a crime or a heart attack or a stroke or an insidious cancer that creeps up on you, and then all of a sudden, weeks or months later, you're gone. And there's unresolved stuff between that person and that person's loved ones. So this happens all the time. So Maimonides says, well, there's a remedy for this. Get a minion. I'm going to ask you in a minute, so pay attention. Why a minion? Why do we need 10? Put them around the grave, and now the transgressor has to make a little speech. So you say in front of them, Chatati ladonai. Note the language. I have sinned before God, or I have sinned against God. Elohei Yisrael, the God of Israel. Velifloni, against Ploni. Ploni is Hebrew for John Doe. So if you don't know someone's name and you're just using like John Doe in Hebrew, you say Ploni, or Ploni Almoni, or Ploni ben Ploni. This guy, son of that guy. That's just common colloquial Hebrew. So I sinned against God first, Adonai, the God of the Israelites, in other words, the God of the Jewish people, and against this guy, this person, Ploni. Lady is Plonit. Okay, Plonize, this guy, I sinned against this person. Obviously, you'd insert his name. Shekach v'chach asiti lo, and I did thus and such against him. So you're supposed to name, this is a Mad Libs, right? You fill in the blank. Name the person, name the transgression, while standing at the guy's grave. Ve'im haya chayav lo mamon, if this person owed him money or wealth or property, ziru leyorshim, you should return that to his heirs, right? So if the transgression was a material transgression, I stole, I embezzled, I took something that didn't belong to me, I borrowed without repaying. Obviously, you can't pay back the dead guy, but you would seek out that person's next of kin and make restitution to them. This, by the way, scaled up at the national level is reparations, right? We can't pay back the enslaved Africans in this country. There is a very important conversation that I wish had more traction, but in this administration will surely be suppressed, that one way to address the crimes against enslaved Africans for centuries in our country is by making reparations to their descendants. It's not the only way. By the way, I think it's totally relevant between the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. I think reparations should be on the table. I think reparations are a far preferable option to, a so-called Palestinian right of return to displace Jews who have been living in Israel from generation to generation. But reparations, I think, should be on the table. So you make reparations to their kin, to their descendants, and then it goes and says, Lo haya yodea lo yorshin, and if you don't know who the heirs, who the inheritors of this person are, yanichenu beveit din v'yitvadeh, then you should bring the case to a rabbinical court, a bet din, 3 duly ordained rabbis, v'yitvadeh, who will take counsel. So this becomes a legal matter. In this case, they actually say I wouldn't say place the actual money, but have the court decide where the money goes. All right. Thus endeth chapter 2. Questions on either of the last two long form teachings, because boy, is there a lot there. All right, that means you're ready to move on. And so we shall. So now we enter chapter 3, Hilkhot Teshuva. I love reading Maimonides in Hebrew. Most of the time, it's really easy to translate. So thank you for indulging me. And I hope that even if you're really intimidated by the Hebrew language and it's not familiar to you, I hope you'll realize, wait a minute, I know that word. Case in point, the way this text begins. Kol echad ve'echad. Each and every person. But literally, kol is all, echad means one, and echad means one. So every one and one. But literally everyone, or every single person, mi b'nei ha'adam, among literally the children of humankind, but people. We're not just talking about Jews. Every single person, yesh lo zechuyot ve'avonot. All right, what an important statement. Every single person has zechuyot, this fella here, this word here, which means merits, ve'avonot, and demerits. Things that one is deserving of praise for, things that one is deserving of condemnation for. Good things to one's credit, bad things to one's discredit. Okay? That's the master statement of this teaching. He elaborates. Mi shezichuyotav yiterot al avonotav tzadik. Very simple formula. Anyone whose merits are greater than his demerits is a tzaddik. This is an astonishing statement. Can we just stop there for a moment? So he starts by saying, everyone has things they should be proud of and things they should be ashamed of. Everyone does things that are good and things that are bad. If in the final summation, the final analysis, you collect more good than bad, you're a tzaddik. He doesn't say by how much. It's not like you need a 2/3 margin. 2/3 good to 1/3 bad. It means that I am 50.0001% more good deeds than bad deeds. I'm a tzaddik. Not just I'm okay. Not just I'm an average dude, but I am deemed to be righteous. How lovely is that? I love this text. I mean, I'm not going to use it as license to go out and punch 3 children in the nose and then put 4 Band-Aids on children who are hurting and say, see, more good than bad. I don't think it works that way, and he'll explain why. But this is so Maimonidean. I love how he's saying, look at how simple this is. Now, of course, you're viewing it with a smile and maybe a little bit of cynicism and going, come on, this works on paper, but life isn't math, right? Forgiveness and transgression is not algebra, right? There's not a formula here. Judy, you're a teacher, so you probably have lots of thoughts on this.
Well, I have lots of thoughts. First of all, who is the judge?
Hmm.
Who's giving you the merits and who's giving you the
I
demerits?
think you know the answer to that.
Yes, of
This
course.
one is not going to go before an earthly court to evaluate.
Okay. Within your heart, within your mind, how you're
Yeah,
really,
or however you understand God.
however you understand. Yeah. Just um,
Okay. Further comment? Okay, we move forward. So, whoops, I hit the wrong tab and lost my Zoom. All right, wait, where were we? Oh my goodness, what did I do? Here it is. Okay, sorry. Suddenly I went back to my screen. I found myself on the website of Chabad. I do that from time to time. There's good stuff there. Okay. So each and every person has merits and demerits. If one's merits outweigh or are greater than his demerits, he's a tzaddik. All right. And of course, the corollary, umisha avanotav yeterot al zechuyotav rasha. And one whose demerits override, or it doesn't say override, it says are greater than, are more than. His merits is a rasha, bad guy, wicked person. Yes, it is true that it is the same term given to the so-called wicked son of the four children at the Passover Seder. And any sensitive reader knows that the Rasha at the Seder table is not the exemplar or the model, the paragon of inveterate evil, but rather challenging, difficult, obnoxious, but not evil. But in this case, I think they're saying, no, basically, if your good deeds outweigh your bad, or if your good deeds outnumber your bad, you're a tzaddik. And if your bad deeds outnumber your good, you're a rasha, you're a bad guy. Okay. Mechetza lemechetza benoni. If it's kind of equal on both sides, mechetza, if it's like half and half, if you have exactly equal good deeds and bad deeds, that's average. Benoni literally means you're an in-between guy or gal. V'chein, okay, this to Russell's comment, who I know had to sign off momentarily, as he often does, because thank you for zooming in from the office, but here you go. So too for the whole nation. V'chein hamedina, im hayu zechuyot kol yoshveha mirubot al avanotehen, harei zot tzadeket. So too a nation. If the collective merits of all of its inhabitants are greater than their bad deeds, then that nation is deemed righteous. Ve'im hayu avanotehen merubin harei zo rasha. But if there are a greater number of bad deeds happening in that country, it is deemed evil, wicked, wrong, bad. V'chein kol ha'olam kulo, and so too for the whole world. If you were to just survey the entire world, and we're not talking about the Jews, to say people, good deeds outweigh bad, we're judged as good. Bad deeds outweigh good, we're judged as bad. Okay. In addition to just asking for general reactions, questions, and comments, I welcome here your report card. Does this work for you? What's missing here? Poke holes in Maimonides' argument, and I promise you, he's already one step ahead of you. But what would you say back to Maimonides if you were debating this point of view? I assume that you don't accept it, at least not 100%. I'm assuming that you say, wait a minute, this has some I can poke some holes in this has some problems, but maybe I'm wrong. What do you think, Audrey?
Well, on a general, I mean, not precise response to that, but the mood. I guess what I have seen as I've lived through life, that you don't always know. I mean, you can think that somebody is one way or another, but you don't always know the backstory, and you shouldn't know in all cases the backstory, but there may be reasons of which you're unaware that cause people to either react in a way or to live in a way. that we don't always know what's behind
Right.
what we observe.
And
And
further, judge not that ye be not judged.
exactly. And I
You really
think,
don't know what people are going through, what they are doing, what they're not doing. There are all of these Hasidic folk tales famously that talk about like the pious miser, a detested member of society who seems never to give a penny. And when appealed to by the head of federation or the rabbi of the shul says, no, no, kind of Scrooge. And then upon dying, you realize that that person has anonymously been like feeding everyone in the town. I'm summarizing. I think it's called the Heavenly Miser. It's an old Hasidic folktale, but it speaks to that idea. It's like, be careful. You
right,
don't actually know the scorecard.
right.
Yeah.
And I think that's generally what he's alluding to.
Well, it certainly, I think, is a an implicit question raised by this. Like, well, first, and again, this could be consonant with what Judy implied. Who are we to be the judge? And the answer is we're not. Really. It's not really for us to do the math, Russell.
Among the many aspects of this that I find problematic is that it seems to be a binary analysis where, there are good things and there are bad things, overlooking the fact that the very same action may have both positive effects and negative effects,
Yeah.
positive on some people, negative on others, even, for the same person. And yet, like you, I have enough admiration for Maimonides, which makes me wonder if that was his very purpose. In other words, is he asking us, look at every single thing that you do and consider the moral implications?
Beautiful.
Where does it fall in, when take it seriously and you're not expected to be perfect, but look at what you do and say, for this action, where does the needle fall? And if that's the case, then maybe this oversimplification is actually challenging us to a very complicated, but ultimately, I think, very moral life.
Thank you so much. And of course, this is not the only work that Maimonides wrote that contemplates these big questions of, what does it mean to be a good and godly person in the world? For his elite philosophical disciples, Maimonides often gives advice that has very, very little to do with what he says in Mishneh Torah. Mishneh Torah is like the lowest common denominator for Maimonides of what constitutes a righteous Jewish life. Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed, often undoes the simplicity of his framework for much of what he teaches in Mishneh Torah. All right, so by the way, if you want like some really vigorous conversation around real life application of what Maimonides is suggesting here, consider what the great author and public intellectual Micha Goodman has recently said and written about Israel. He published a book last year called Hayom HaShmini. It means the eighth day. We have some, just mute yourselves, folks. It's easier for me. He said, in this book. The book is only in Hebrew right now, so most of what I'm getting have been from English language podcasts. Though, obviously to read a Hebrew book is both a joy and a struggle for me. So I've read some excerpts, but Micha Goodman is describing the current state of affairs with Israel and Gaza, the Middle East, and the West as a tragic dilemma that he frames as follows: that everything Israel does to be feared in the Middle East are the very same things that Israel is doing to be hated in the West. And everything that Israel would do to be loved by the West would actually compromise its safety and security and its regional supremacy in the Middle East. In other words, a dilemma is not when you are choosing to do one good thing instead of one bad thing. A true dilemma is where you have a choice between two good things that also might be bad things. So to Russell's, I think, trenchant analysis, there is no, in the real world, I shouldn't say there is no, but it is often the case that the decisions we make that bring about a positive or that are motivated for good and positive reasons also have a negative side effect or commensurate effect that's just as powerful as the positive effect. So regional deterrence and the ability for Israel's army to protect its citizens Those are very important good things, especially in the dangerous world of the Middle East. But if in order to do that, Israel must exact a brutality against its enemies, the same brutality that causes its enemies to recoil and fear Israel and not want to perpetrate another October 7th, if that has the effect of Israel becoming a pariah in the West, of which it aspires to belong, or to which it aspires to belong, as a Western-style democracy, which, despite anything you might read, still is, then Israel has a real tragic dilemma on its hands. It's a lovely framing that I think elucidates and amplifies the point that rare in the real world is the action that is purely good or purely bad. Rather, most of the things we do have a little bit of both baked into individual actions and decisions. I know I have to do this for such and so reason, but I also know it's going to hurt that one person. How many times a day do we have decisions like this to make? Okay. I could go on because I feel this one deeply. I feel like most of the time, any decision I make for the benefit of the community of Westchester Reformed Temple has a negative effect on at least a few people. Don't like it. You know, if it were up to me, every single person in the community would have a seat to the late service on Yom Kippur morning, but they don't. And we have a waiting list 300 deep. And if you're one of those people, just go to the early service if you can, would you please? I love you, but that's why we have a 9 a.m. service. And that's why we also have an intergenerational service at 1 o'clock. It's not like there aren't other options. So that's my pitch. All right, here we go. So back to what Maimonides is teaching us. So he says, everyone has good and bad. This is also true at the national level. And then he says, a person who's, no, that was the end of, wait, where am I here? Here we go. Thank you. Such is true for the whole world as well. Okay, so we've read all of that. Let's go to the next text. Adam she'avonotav mirubin al zuchuyotav miyad hu mate. As for a person whose bad deeds are greater than his good deeds, I'm using the gender exclusive male formulation that Maimonides himself uses, but of course this applies to both gender, to all genders. Before he dies, miyad, or at the time that he dies, Berisho shene'amar, so he dies in a state of transgression. As it is written, al rov avonech, according to the majority of one's transgressions. We'll look at where that text comes from. The kin medina, so too for a country, she'avonoteha murubim miyad hi ovedet, so too for a country whose transgressions outweigh their good deeds just before it is overthrown. Shene'amar, as it is written in Genesis chapter 18:20, the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is very great. Okay? And so too for the whole world, if all of the transgressions of the world were to outnumber the good deeds in the world, miyad, I'm sorry, I'm translating this word wrong. Immediately they would be destroyed. All right, so let me do this again for you since I whiffed the translation. A person who's let's just read it the way they do it. If your person's sins exceed your merits, he will immediately die. Miyad means right away. I was reading it the wrong way. As Jeremiah says, I have smitten you for the multitude of your transgressions. Similarly, a country whose sins are great will immediately be obliterated. The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is very great. Why? Because those cities were known in the ancient world, and especially through the Midrash, through rabbinic literature, as bastions of all kinds of dastardly deeds, and with the whole world. If its inhabitants were to be greater than the merits of the world would immediately be destroyed. What do we know? How do we know that? Witness Noah's flood. Now, question, what does this imply about the state of the world and the people who are living here? I would say the corollary is so long as the world is not destroyed, there's still a modicum of good overriding the bad. So for all of you who woke up to the headlines this morning very, very, very depressed, fear not. If the world didn't end, then there's still more good in the world than bad. I don't know. It feels awfully simplistic and reductive to me. Yeah, thumbs down from Russell. Me too. I think Maimonides wants us to have faith in the, you know, who was it, Anne Frank, who said, I still believe that people are basically good at heart? Yeah, well, as was pointed out to me, Anne Frank wrote those words before the Nazis captured her and murdered her. She didn't write those in captivity. She wrote them in hiding. And she was 15. But they murdered her because she was a Jew. So I don't know. Is the world more good than bad or more bad than good? At the end of the day, of course, we all recognize this is kind of an idle, speculative, intellectual exercise that has no bearing on how the world really works. Wouldn't you agree? Okay. Well, then we read on. And he says the following. And this, I think, is really important. Actually, for this, I do want the Hebrew. Vishikul ze. Shikul, by the way, comes from the Hebrew word for shekel, right? A shekel is, of course, a coin. It's a unit of currency, but it literally means a weight, weight. It's a weight of silver, to be specific. So shikul means the weighing of this. Eino lefi minyan hazuchuyot ve'avonot. It's not actually according to the number. Minyan, that's a word you know, minyan, counting. It's not eino lefi minyan. It's not according to the counting of the good deeds and the bad deeds, but rather lefi godlam, from gadol, their size, their magnitude. All right. Somebody asked this early on in our classes. Well, is it just like, are all good deeds equally weighted? Are all bad deeds equally weighted? Of course not. Right? Insulting somebody for passing gas is not the same as stabbing them in the face. Right. Right. There's a lot. Okay. Lots of layers of good and bad. And Maimonides is saying it's not just how much you did, it's the weight. How much do they weigh? And of course, the image here is the Libra, right? The scales of justice. On one side are all the good deeds, on the other side are all the bad deeds. And which weighs more? You might have numerically many, 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 many more good deeds, but they're like feathers that don't actually outweigh one giant stone of murder. Right? 100 feathers will not tip the scale against a stone that is associated with a horrible, heinous transgression. All the nice things you do in your life might not actually outweigh one terrible, terrible deed. I think that actually feels more true to the way the world actually works and the way ethics actually work. Okay, and then he goes on, and here we'll go back to the English. As I just tried to elucidate, there are some merits which outweigh many sins, as implied by the text in 1 Kings, because in him was found a good quality. We'll get to what that's all about. In contrast, a single sin may outweigh many merits, as it is written in Ecclesiastes, one sin may obscure much good. And back to Judy's question, which I said I think you know the answer to, the weighing of sins and merits is carried out according to the wisdom of the knowing God. God alone, it doesn't say alone, but I would say God alone knows how to measure merits against sins. It's like, kids don't try this at home. You're not going to be able to come up with the way God measures things. So watch your back. Let's look at these side texts after Anne gives us her question, please. Just unmute. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this idea that somehow this is being judged from above by God goes contrary to the way I think. But my feeling about this, and it has been for a long time, is that like evil, is its own destruction. That when someone does something that's truly negative, eventually that person pays internally and in their role in society and their level of happiness and their sense of well-being, and a society too, that it eats itself away. Whereas when there's more positive, it thrives. So that's my view, that this is not God looking down judging, but it's what happens when it's like the body, when there's negative stuff going on because you're ill, you eventually die. Whereas if everything is working well, you live and you thrive. So
Yeah, thank you so much. Um, really appreciate that. So in order to understand the passage that Maimonides is bringing to illustrate this point, that really only God can judge, and that sometimes a single sin can outweigh many good deeds, or a single good deed can outweigh many transgressions. Um, we'll look at this passage. It concerns one of the early kings of Israel, right after the kingdom split following the reign of King Solomon. So we know that the united monarchy was presided over by three kings: Saul, whom we've already referenced today, David, whom we've already referenced today, and then Solomon, who built the temple, but who also transgressed in a lot of different interesting ways. After Solomon's reign, however, the kingdom split. Some scholars of Jewish or Israelite history suggest that it was always split and only temporarily united around the common Philistine threat, which threatened the whole Israelite population, both in the north and the south. But it split into a northern kingdom of 10 tribes collectively known as Yisrael or Israel, and a southern kingdom comprised of the big tribe of Judah and a little bit of the satellite tribe of Benjamin, known collectively as Judah or Judea. It is that tribe and that kingdom which will later become the remnant known as the Jews. The Judeans are the Jews. It's the same word, Yehudah. So you have Israel in the north, which eventually will become the lost tribes of Israel because they will be vanquished by the Assyrians. You have the Judean kingdom in the south, which will be known as Judah and which will be exiled by the Babylonians, but eventually reconstituted under the Persian king Cyrus. There, I just did 500 years of Jewish history in 5 sentences. Now, after the kingdom split, one of the first kings in the north was Jeroboam or Yirav-am. And so this is a story about the demise of the kingdom of Jeroboam. And here's what it says. God said to Ahijah, don't worry about these other characters. Jeroboam's wife is coming to inquire of you concerning her son who is sick. So the king and his wife, the queen, have a sick child. Speak to her thus and thus. When she arrives, she will be in disguise. Ahijah heard the sound of her feet as she came through the door, and he said, come in, wife of Jeroboam. Why are you disguised? I have bad news. I have a harsh message for you. What's the message? Ahijah, by the way, is the priest who has this kind of prophetic ability. Go tell Jeroboam the king, thus says the eternal, the God of Israel, I raised you up from among the people, and I made you a ruler over my people Israel. I tore away the kingdom from the house of David and gave it to you. In other words, you are not of the stock of David. And unfortunately, it was a bad move because you have not been like my servant David, who kept my commandments and followed me with all his heart, doing only what was right in my sight. Yeah, I take issue with that too. If you've read about David, that seems like an overly generous eulogy for him, but okay. You, however, Jeroboam, have acted worse than all those who preceded you. You have gone and made for yourself other gods and molten images to provoke my anger, and me you have cast behind your back. Bad, bad Jeroboam. Therefore, what am I going to do? I will bring disaster upon the house of Jeroboam, and I will cut off from Jeroboam every male bond and free in Israel. I will sweep away the house of Jeroboam utterly as dung is swept away. In other words, you are nothing to me. Your line is over. Your rulership is ending. All right. But anyone belonging to Jeroboam who dies in the town shall be devoured by dogs, and anyone who dies in the open country shall be eaten by the birds of the air, for God has spoken. All right. Bad news, Jeroboam. As for you, go back home. As soon as you set foot in the town, the child will die. So just when you thought things couldn't get even worse, even your own son, who has been grievously ill and for whom you and your wife have entreated, will die, and all Israel shall lament over him and bury him. He alone of Jeroboam's family shall be brought to burial. For in him alone of the house of Jeroboam has some devotion been found to the eternal, the God of Israel. In other words, the one mercy I will spare you is you can bury him properly. He won't be carrion for the dogs and the birds. Ugh. This is hard news. Tough news for Jeroboam. Moreover, God will raise up a king over Israel who will destroy the house of Jeroboam this day and now. And more bad news. Okay, so this is what they're saying. There are some merits which outweigh many sins as implied by this, because in him there was found a single good quality. In other words, this kid was basically innocent. So that outweighs, he won't die, he won't be eaten like carrion. You can bury him properly. I'm not so comforted. Don't know about you. And then similarly, the matching text at the end, and often, sorry, a sin can, one sin may obscure much good. That one we don't need to go and do a deep dive into Ecclesiastes because the verse is self-evident, who actually says one sin may obscure or even erase much good. That's what I was saying about the feathers on one side of the scale and the stone on the other. If the stone is just a heinous crime, that doesn't outweigh the fact that you went and fed people in homeless shelters every week for 20 weeks before that. Doesn't work that way. All right, we have time for one more little bit. All right, and only God knows. Only God knows how to measure. Now, this next passage is really interesting. So, Kol mi shenicham al hamitzvot she'asa, v'taha al hazuchuyot, ve'amar belibo. Okay, let's take this. Anyone, kol mi shenicham, who regrets al mitzvot she'asa, regrets doing the mitzvahs that one did. V'taha al hazuchuyot, he forfeits the reward. All right, the merit doesn't count. Ve'amar belibo, so he rejects. I wish I hadn't done this. As it says, anyone who changes his mind about the mitzvot he's performed and regrets the merits he has earned, saying in his heart, well, what value was there in doing them? I wish I hadn't performed them. All these years that I spent trying to be upright and good, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, taking care of my loved ones, speaking kindly and compassion, what has it got me? I'm poor. I watch my neighbor, who's a real shyster, get ahead in the world while I'm left behind. Do you know people like this? Right? What good has it done me to be a good person? Well, it's interesting what Maimonides concludes in such case. If you regret the mitzvot, that person loses them all and no merit is preserved for him at all. As is stated in Ezekiel, another quote that you can look up, but we don't need to because it is self-evident. It speaks very plainly to the meaning of Maimonides' teaching. The righteousness of the upright will not save him on the day of his transgression. In other words, if you do the right thing, but wish you hadn't, well, you invalidate it all, which is fascinating, by the way, because it suggests that the deed itself is insufficient when it comes to how merit is computed for a person. You have to actually feel good that you did the right thing for its own sake, even if you obtained zero material benefit, or even worse, if by doing the right thing, you incurred personal suffering. Audrey.
Well, I guess it's exactly what you just said, but if you're doing the right thing, you're doing it because it's the right thing, not with the expectation of a reward or a merit. So, because I would think that if you have those expectations, that diminishes the act itself.
Right. And Maimonides is saying, look, this only counts if you regret doing the right thing. Right? If you say, I wish I had done the wrong thing instead, or I wish I had just hadn't spent all that time doing good, all right, well, you don't get the points.
Right.
The second half of the text goes on as follows. We'll complete this unit and then say sayonara until tomorrow. Just as one's merits and sins are weighed at the time of his death, so too the sins of every inhabitant of the world together with his merits are weighed on the festival of Rosh Hashanah. You knew it was coming back, right? You knew we wouldn't let this go without a reminder that the holidays are coming. If one is found righteous, his verdict is sealed for life in the sense of another year. For the next year, you live. Hooray. If one is found wicked, his verdict is sealed for death. Boo, but you're up to you. All right, so when does the sentence get handed down? On Rosh Hashanah. But a Benoni's verdict remains tentative until Yom Kippur. If that person repents, that verdict is sealed for life. So if you make Teshuvah, you can avert the severity of the decree. And if not, death. All right. How many people think that Maimonides thinks that they are righteous enough to get by on their own merits for another year without making any Teshuvah? I don't know about you, but I'm not willing to raise my hand right now. And how many of you think that, well, I won't force you, just to yourself, consider whether or not you're such an inveterate bad person that you deserve death on Rosh Hashanah? My guess is that Maimonides knows, and he's kind of winking at us and going, of course, we're all Benoni. We're all in between. And because only God knows the actual balance, we all should be approaching the new year with the intention to do Teshuvah. Because even if we suspect for a few minutes that, yeah, I think I've had a pretty good year. I think I did some real good in the world. I doubt that there is anyone among us who is so stiff-necked, to quote the liturgy, that we would say, I have done nothing wrong. And because only God knows how the scales work, we should probably do the Teshuvah, right? Because just in case the scales aren't in our favor, that's why we have these 10 days. Because I think what the truest thing we can say about all is this, we are all Benoni. We're all somewhere in between. That takes us back to the beginning of this long section that we've really been contemplating today at length. Every person has good deeds and bad deeds. And if you don't know how they're going to be measured, because it's not just about the number and it's not just about the weight, it's also about how you think about them, right? That whole business about regretting them. So maybe when Rosh Hashanah comes and the book of life is opened wide and fate hangs in the balance, maybe we shouldn't blow off the chance to do a little Teshuvah. That, I think, is probably the ultimate takeaway. Though for the more simple-minded, I can hear Maimonides saying, it's good that they know the formula. It's good that they know that there's like math behind this and that it's not totally random or that we live or die according to the whim of the creator with no regard for what kind of lives we're living. In other words, another thing that is deeply Jewish about this text is that it wants us to hold fast to the notion that what we do here on earth really, really matters. It really matters. I don't think we should act in the hopes of reward or not act badly in the fear of punishment. I don't think Maimonides would want us to live that way either. But if it helps you do the right thing, then it's, the net effect is good. But more to the point, each one of us is somewhere in between and we all have work to do. Mara, you want to get the last comment in for the day?
Which brings me up to the age-old question of what happens when bad things happen to good people. A
Right.
wonderful person is struck down by a bus in the street.
Right.
Where does that fit in?
Yeah, we'll get to that. I mean, I think that is implied all throughout as, it is not necessarily, there's a logical fallacy here. A lot of people think that because Maimonides suggests that if you do bad things will happen to you, that necessarily means that if bad things are happening to you, it is because you did something wrong. That's not actually good logic. Causality and correlation are not the same thing, right? It may be the case that just you had a lousy year, and whether you did good or bad, you had a lousy year, and a lot of bad stuff happened in your life. That doesn't necessarily mean you did wrong. And it also doesn't change the fact that in the Maimonidean frame, the more wrong you do, the more likely you are to have a bad outcome. So I think that's how Maimonides would field it. And I think he would not want you to interpret from your perceived degree of suffering how wrong you have been. I don't think that's anywhere suggested in these texts. That's what we wrestle with every day, though. All right. Have a wonderful Shabbat. I'm not on the Bima tomorrow night, but we will be memorializing 9/11 as we do every Friday, closest to the observance of the day itself. In the meantime, may your observance of this difficult day stir you to a greater appreciation of the freedoms that we sometimes take for granted, including what America has to reclaim, which is the ability to speak freely and disagree freely without resorting to weapons. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you soon.